Hey, everybody, welcome. And believe it or not, we're in the last week of class. So, um, pretty much wanted to go over your presentation on a major mental illness, and then the final paper is going to be about yourself. So, those are inside of D2L for you. Um, Writing about the different ways that you had been brought up and had worked with folks. So, um, going from there, I had Dr. Kaplan speaking on child development. So, just lifespan development in general. I'm going to go with
sometimes I just want to run a card. Go, you know?
I do know. And I think I can help you with that.
Really?
Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Daniel Kaplan and welcome to my channel. I'm a clinical psychologist and I've been a professor for over 15 years. Find on my channel are videos related to clinical psychology, psychotherapy, personality theory, human development, research methods, and so much more. Hit the subscribe button if you're looking to take your knowledge about psychology to the next level. Because I design every video with intent that you can take something away from. I'm super excited to have you here, and I look forward to you coming on this journey with me. Welcome aboard. Okay, welcome to Lifespan Development. In our first lecture, we're going to go over general principles about lifespan development. We're going to go over what development is and different ways to conceptualize aging. And then we'll go over some of the major theories about lifespan development. And by the end of that, we should be good. So let me share my screen. And I'm going to start the slideshow. So I wanted to start at the beginning. So long story short, when we talk about lifespan, forgive me for my older slides, but the principles are the same. But when we talk about lifespan development, each of these words needs further clarification. So when we look at the word lifespan, what is the lifespan? When does life begin? So there are different philosophical debates about when life begins, but from our point of view, life begins from conception. And when does life end? Life ends at death. So we are going to look at developmental experiences from womb to tomb. So when we talk about lifespan development, we're looking from womb to tomb. Next class or next lecture, I will make some differences between the legal arguments about when life begins. For those people who are pro-life versus pro-choice, I'll make some distinctions and we'll see where we land. But for this class, all we need to know is the lifespan is from womb to tomb. And development, well, what is development? Development refers to changes that occur. And these changes could occur across many different domains. They could be physical changes. They could be cognitive changes. They could be socio-emotional changes, and so forth. So, changes that occur across the lifespan. Now, many of you would have said development is growth. and you would have used the term growth rather than using the term changes. But as we will see, our physical prime is in early adulthood, and then we start to have some regression. So it can't just be growth or positive development. It has to be any change, whether it be positive or negative, that occurs across the lifespan. And that's actually why we look at conception, because there are changes that are happening prenatally.
So many people today are going to the doctor with these symptoms. Might sound familiar. Low energy, hair thinning, not sleeping well.
So let's begin. So as I said, development is a pattern of movement or change that begins at conception and it goes through the lifespan. Now, it can include positive growth, or it could include regression or decline. So we'll see in middle adulthood that we start to have physical and physiological changes that are not positive. There's decline in hearing, there's decline in vision, there's delayed reaction time. And even on cognitive things like memory, we start to see some decline in various forms of memory and intelligence. So we do see development goes up, but then it starts to go down again. So there will be decline as part of development as well. Now, when we talk about developmental psychology, there are two ways to look at it. There's
regression
the
or
traditional
decline.
approach, and then there's the lifespan approach. The traditional approach focuses from prenatal development up to adolescence. And the reason why most people who take the traditional approach do that is because many of the major theories that explain developmental psychology stop somewhere in adolescence. And you're going to see that in this class as well. However, there's little emphasis on what happens in adulthood and the decline in old age, because from a traditional point of view, the massive changes that occur start to slow down, so it's not prioritized. Whereas in this particular class, we're going to focus on the lifespan, and we're going to focus on changes from womb to tomb. And because developmental psychology or lifespan development tends to be one of those courses that are valuable if you're a psychology major, if you are an education major, if you are a nursing major, and so many others, it's very important that we take a lifespan perspective so you get what you need out of this class as you move forward with your degree. So we're going to take a lifespan approach. Now, when we talk about lifespan, the oldest documented lifespan is roughly 120 years old. Most people don't live that long, so yeah, you'll notice that things have shifted. But a better number is what we call life expectancy. Now, life expectancy is the average number of years a person can expect to live unless something shortens their life. And that's about 78 to 80 years old. So that is the average life expectancy. Now, people live older than that, and you're going to read from the baby boomer generation that there is going to be a rise in centenarians, right? Those people living to 100. But the average lifespan is about 78. The peak of lifespan is a little over 120 years. All right. And on your right, there's also an interesting graphic because we are living longer. If we go to prehistoric times or ancient Greece or even 100 years ago, we are living longer than our ancestors. And there are many reasons why this is occurring, right? Because we have better health care, we have better nutrition, we are not living in the elements as much as we used to. We're more careful about disease and water and things like that. So we're living longer. And that is a good thing in many ways, but we're also going to see in late adulthood that there are some problems with us living this long, mainly neurocognitive disorders like Alzheimer's disease, Huntington's disease, dementia is a serious problem. And the older you get, the prevalence of dementia increases with age. So some scientists argue that we are outliving our brain. And that's what's responsible for some of the neurocognitive decline. But in any event, that's where we are with life expectancy. And since 2005, very little has changed.
All right, so seeing how long folks do live, you can include in that paper, like maybe if your parents are still alive, also if grandparents are, and different things that they run into throughout their development.
So when we look at lifespan development, you could look at it from many different viewpoints. You could look at it as a lifelong perspective, a multidimensional perspective, a multi-directional perspective, a plastic perspective, multidisciplinary perspective, and contextual. And we're going to cover all of them. Don't worry about the fact that I'm reading off a list and not explaining it, because as we move through the slides, I'm going to cover each of these. But in general, it's very important to understand that development includes both our growth, maintenance, and regulation of loss. And it includes biological, sociological, sociocultural, and internal individual factors working together. So when we say development is lifelong, early adulthood is not the end of development. And that's important because if you look at many of the child development textbooks, they stop at adolescence. And then what happens in adulthood? Well, early adulthood is not the end point. Changes continue to occur in early adulthood, middle adulthood, later adulthood, and so forth. And there's no real age period that's better than the next. No real age period dominates. So there's these phrases of being over the hill. Well, but there are also other phrases that say your golden years, and they're contradictory messages. But in general, we say that each age period has a function and something to learn. And the theory that's most relevant, as we'll talk about going forward, is Erik Erikson's theory. Things are happening across the lifespan. All right. So it's lifelong. It's multidimensional. When we experience the world around us, we're experiencing the socio-emotional factors, but we're also experiencing our internal cognitive factors, our mental processes, and biology. And each of these dimensions are overlapping. So the physical domain includes your biology, things like physical growth, genetics, hormones, things like that. Cognitive development refers to the way we think, so memory, intelligence, judgment, decision-making, planning, these kind of things would be put into the cognitive domain. And then socio-emotional things are related to social factors, the environment we live in, and emotional factors, how we regulate our emotions, and so forth. And there, as I listed several things, you can see there are multiple components within all three of these dimensions. So I like to treat them as almost like a Venn diagram that has 3 circles that are overlapping. They're not independent, they're actually interdependent, and your physical development could impact your cognitive development, and your cognitive development could impact your socio-emotional development, and vice versa. All of them could impact one another. Development is multi-directional. So we talked about expansion and shrinkage, growth and regression. So some aspects, some dimensions or components of a dimension are going to expand. Others are going to shrink. So one example of both expansion and shrinkage in the brain, if you look at the brain's development, it is amazing. You start by single cell that splits and splits and splits and turns into this massive structure, this 2.5-pound brain that we have. But it takes time to develop into that 2.5-pound brain, and there are all these neurons that are connecting, and it's growing, and the brain gets larger up to a certain point, right, to a certain volume, and then it plateaus, and it stays at that volume. So we've had an increase in neuronal tissue. However, we talked about Alzheimer's disease. We see atrophy. We see shrinkage of the brain. And there are certain areas of the brain that do different things. So the hippocampus is responsible for memory functioning. And sure enough, when we talk about Alzheimer's disease, there is shrinkage in volumetry studies of the hippocampal area. So we have both expansion and shrinkage, and it can occur in both ways, both directions. Plasticity. We talk about neuroplasticity. This is the ability to change, or the flexibility to change. When we talk about the brain in particular, the brain is most flexible for change in earlier points in time. In fact, your brain is most plastic or flexible to adjust to trauma from birth to about 6. And then from 6 to about 11, it becomes moderately plastic, and then 11 plus, it is largely hardwired with few exceptions. So there, the ability for the person to change or adapt also changes across the lifespan. And development, when we talk about development or changes that occur across the lifespan, we don't have a monopoly on this science. You'll see that development is of interest to psychologists and sociologists, anthropologists, neuroscientists, medical researchers, right? So educators, so many disciplines have an interest in development because it affects the whole organism. So because it affects physical, cognitive, and socio-emotional domains, those 3 domains, it's going to be of interest of all kinds of disciplines. So we draw from all of these disciplines, and we don't believe that psychology is the sole or superior voice.
Ready to be an e-commerce pioneer? Bluehost.
And so as you see, a lot of your development comes from your upbringing and just stuff that you see with your parents and whatnot.
Development is contextual, right? So when we talk about changes that occur, it's important to understand the setting the person is in. So things like history plays a role, finances play a role, the society as a whole plays a role, and the culture you live in plays a role. Each of these factors are going to make your experience unique. So I'll give you an example. 2 people. One lives in the United States. One lives in Japan. They're 2 very different cultural experiences. Is the worldview going to be the same or similar for these 2 groups? Probably not based on the value system. All right, so let's not be so extreme and do East versus West. Let's say United States versus United States. People born in the 1920s versus people born in 2000. Is the worldview going to be the same at different historical time periods? The answer is no. Finances. Two people living in the United States in 2020. One is very wealthy. One is economically disadvantaged. Is their experience going to be the same or similar? And so forth. It goes on and on and on. The point is that when we understand the development of a person, they have to understand the context, the unique factors. So we do have three influences that we look at. So we look at normative age-graded influences. So we look for people of a given age group, what they're supposed to master. So when we talk about IQ tests, many IQ tests are age-based. So we look at what you were supposed to know at a given age or be able to perform at a given age and what you actually can perform. And we compare the two. And because we compare the two, well, if you're better off than what your chronological age is, then maybe you're more intelligent than your age mates. If it's lower, then we give you a lower IQ score, but whatnot. So we compare you relative to your peers and what you're supposed to know or perform at a given age. Normative history graded influence. So again, it's very important to understand that people of a particular generation see the world differently because of historical circumstances. I always say that we lived in a different world pre-9/11 relative to post-9/11.
Hi, everybody.
And I'm not
Madison.
trying to be overly political
I'm gonna
with
have
this,
everybody
but
go
just
around,
think about
say
travel.
their name, introduce
Think
themselves,
about
who they
travel
are, and
before
something
9/11.
that you like to do.
Some of you are like, well, I wasn't born, I was really young, I don't remember travel.
You can start with
Just watch movies. So
and then we're
there's
gonna
a
go
holiday classic called Home Alone. And if you look at Home Alone and the McAllisters, they run all the way up with their tickets to the airplane virtually. Post 9/11, you have to go through TSA, you have to go through a screening. That would never happen. So the world has shifted in 2020 with the COVID pandemic. The way we take for granted our health and interacting with others has shifted. So there's more of an emphasis on hand sanitizer or wearing masks, which in other parts of the world, they have been doing this for years. But because of a pandemic in 2020, the whole world is operating similar to East Asia. It shifted in a massive way. So history matters. Same thing I said, if you were born in the 20s versus now, 1920s versus 2020s, it would be different a century later. And then non-normative life events. So we talked about normative history, where everyone experienced the same thing, but it's also very important to understand the unique experience of the individual. And there are people who are experiencing trials and tribulations that you can't even imagine, all over the world, including New York and New Jersey, and in our safe country that we call home.
This is Jupiter.
So yeah, some of the things that you guys may not have seen is those developments since 9/11. I know a lot of you folks have also been born after 9/11, so they are just normal to you. They're a lot different to me when they had all come out, for sure.
But Think about people who have food insecurity or housing insecurity. Some people will never know those struggles. But I bet someone, or maybe you experience this, and it's going to affect your personal development. Let's move on. So we talked about development includes really a review. We talked about the internal factors, the individual characteristics, and the social cultural factors. So let's talk about some important contemporary concerns. So we talk about health and well-being. Health and well-being is incredibly important. And if the pandemic didn't teach you that, I don't know what will. Our health is so critical. Now, before the pandemic, our health and well-being was also important to us. And you could have seen it then. I would have used a different example before the pandemic, but I would have talked about you go to your local Barnes & Noble or magazine store and count the number of health and fitness magazines there are, or well-being. This could be physical well-being or psychological well-being. Go to the self-help section of Barnes & Noble, and you will see that there's a lot of resources writing and trying to explain health and well-being. This is very important. And each member of society, no matter where you are around the world, you want to be healthy. You want to have both physical and psychological well-being. And the struggles we face as we will go through these lectures, you will see, are different across the globe, but nevertheless, everyone is striving for the same thing, health and well-being. We also talk about parenting and education and the value of education. Parenting styles differ within and across cultures. So it's very important to talk about effective parenting. And I'm not just going to take a Western point of view. I'm going to give you some research both on Western parenting and what the ideal parenting style is. And then I'm also going to give you some research on more traditional cultures and the effect of authoritarian parenting and whether or not that is as harmful as we believe it is. But we also want to pay attention to sociocultural factors, context, diversity. Other than COVID-19, the other major shift in 2020 was the spotlight on structural oppression and racism. So there are different Americas. Two people walking down the street don't experience the same America. So we want to understand things like diversity, equity, and inclusion, because that's going to be important to fully appreciating the experience of those who come through your doors, whether it be in your classroom, whether it be in the hospital setting, or whether they come into your treatment group. So culture, what is culture? These are behavioral patterns, beliefs, and all other products of a particular group of people that are disseminated from generation to generation or passed down. Our ethnicity includes many different things. So cultural heritage, nationality, race, religion, and language all impact the definition of one's ethnicity. Our socioeconomic status, our financial position, our educational attainment, and the prestige people put upon us. And gender, the experience of males, females, gender fluid and trans community are all unique from one another. And our experiences are different, and many of us profit from different forms of privilege based on being male. I'm not naive that I experience male privilege. And for what does that look like? Well, that looks like many things, but I'll give you one. When I walk down the street, I'm not objectified for my body, and it's more common among females, and so forth. So understanding the unique struggles of each group is going to be important. So we also, as I said, we have to understand the various domains, the biological component or the physical component, all has to do with brain, body, genetics, hormones, and so forth. Your cognitive development, these are thoughts, intelligence, language, and so forth. And socio-emotional factors are your emotions and your experience with others, your relationships, friendships, personality, and so forth. So now let's talk about developmental periods. This is one of, this is one of two slides that are going to be very, very important, because as we go through the lessons, you're going to see that your developmental period is used as a framework for each of the lessons to follow. So what are developmental periods? Those are just a fancy way of saying time frames. So we have the prenatal period, and that's from conception to birth. And prenatal development, as we're going to see, is going to be further divided. It's going to be chopped up into smaller pieces, and birth is going to be chopped up into smaller pieces. But for now, prenatal development is one time period, roughly 9 to 10 months. Infancy is birth to about 18 to 24 months. Some textbooks will say 12 months. But in infancy, you see that the organism is highly dependent on adults. For the first year of your life, you're pre-verbal. And your only way of communicating is through crying. But just because you're nonverbal or pre-verbal is a better way, I like to say it that way, doesn't mean that you're not developing. There are a lot of things that happen physically, psychologically, and socio-emotionally during infancy. And then we have our early childhood, which is the end of infancy to about 5 or 6. People refer to this as your preschool years, where you start to see self-sufficiency and increased play. Then you have middle and late childhood, which is 6 to 11 years. This is your school age years. This is when you first enter the school. Now you have to focus on self-regulation, self-control, and academic achievement. Then we have adolescence. That's from puberty till early adulthood. Now, there's a massive physical change that happens. You have 2 growth spurts across the lifespan, in infancy and in adolescence. So you have all kinds of changes, changing body, questions your sense of self, your sense of identity, and you strive to become autonomous or independent. Early adulthood, this is when you are now in the workforce and you're now finding a romantic partner. So this is your late teens to early 30s. And I'm going to divide it differently later in the semester, because I think it's important to understand different ways to conceptualize these. But the biggest thing, biggest 2 goals are finding a romantic partner and getting a job and settling down. Middle adulthood, now we're starting to interact with society and our social responsibility, and now we're looking for legacy, passing things down to the next generation. And then late adulthood, we start to do a life review, and we start to, I guess, come to terms with our mortality, because in late adulthood, now we're facing the prospect of death, because there are more years behind us than are in front of us. So those are the developmental periods. I have a lot more to say about this. I'm not going to go point by point, but that's important to understand. Now, there is another way to break these periods down, or the 4 ages of development. The first age is child and adolescent. So those we're looking at when you're a dependent. That's the best way to say it. It's when you're dependent from the sense of the society. your second age is prime adulthood. This is between your 20s and your 50s. And your third period is 60 to 79, and then the fourth period is 80 and older. So if I were to ask you, well, when do you think is the happiest time for you? Is it your first age or your second age? Many of you probably would say somewhere in your first or second age, but we've done research on this, and it turns out that no age reports on average more happiness than another, more satisfaction than another. Each age group has its own stress advantages and disadvantages. And this is a great study by Diener, D-E-I-N-E-R, who demonstrated that the percentage of people who are happy, whether you be 15 to 24 or whether you be 65 plus or anywhere in between, is roughly 80%. 4 out of 5 people report being happy. And it almost looks like a straight line because the differences are negligible across the lifespan. So when you're saying, oh, I'll be happier when my kids are out of the house, or I'll be happier when I get a job. No, you won't. You will be happier if you choose to be happy. Each of us can choose to be happy people. And we don't have to wait for some monumental event to happen for us to be happy. If you're looking for that, then you're probably going to miss all the opportunities that are right in front of you, waiting for this happiness to emerge. Now, when we talk about age and aging, how should age be conceptualized? Well, the conception of age shifts in many different ways. So chronological age is what you're most familiar with. What does your birth certificate say? How old are you? But there are other ways to view age and aging. So your biological age, so your physical health. There are people who are 40 but are physically starting to decline. So if a person has early onset Alzheimer's, and it seems to be the theme of today's lesson, but if a person has early onset Alzheimer's, then maybe they are older than what their birth certificate says. Or your psychological age. Your psychological age is your ability to adapt to the roles of society based on your chronological age. And then your social age is how well you fit in with the societal roles and expectations of society. Those are different things. Now let's talk about nature versus nurture. This was a historic debate as early as Socrates and Aristotle. And that debate that started in ancient Greece remains to this very day. So, nature versus nurture. When we say nature is who you are based on biological inheritance, or nurture is it due to environmental experiences. And if you were to ask Socrates, he would be on the position of nature, and if you were to ask Aristotle, he would be on the position of nurture. If you were to ask Rene Descartes in the time period of the Renaissance, he would take the position of nature again. If you were to ask John Locke, he would take the position of nurture. But if you were to fast forward to later philosophers like Immanuel Kant, he would say it's a combination of the two. You need both a priori, biological, and a posteriori, nurture, environmental factors. So really, this debate that has occurred and people have taken one side or the other, it's kind of silly. And today we've seen that the position, it's really not nature versus nurture, it's nature via nurture. So both factors play a role in making you who you are. So nature are the evolutionary or genetic factors that promote commonality. Nurture are the environmental factors, biological factors that promote individual differences. Stability versus change is a second debate within our literature. Who you are, do you stay the same or do you change across the lifespan? And just like nature versus nurture, where we try and pick a side, I'm gonna tell you, anytime you say a versus, it's probably a combination of the two. Dichotomies are traps. So some things are gonna be relatively stable and other aspects of who you are going to change. So stability, on the side of stability, things like your personality traits, they're relatively stable. Your overarching personality is relatively stable. But certain unique aspects of personality can be shifted. For example, if you were to do a full assessment of personality on me, you would discover that in general, I am an introvert. But I am not shy. I believe myself to be engaging. I interact with students very well, but I'm an introvert. Every personality test I've taken has suggested I'm an introvert. But what I found fascinating in the years of teaching is that my personality has shifted. It has shifted a little bit on this introversion, extroversion domain towards the middle. Now, what can account for this shift? I don't think I'll ever turn into an extrovert, but why am I moving towards the middle?
At Grammarly, our vision is to improve lives by improving communication. We do that by empowering teams with AI communication assistance. Today, you're going to meet various team members who will demonstrate how we at Grammarly use our own product to communicate more effectively.
I'm a stickler for consistency because I really think it matters how you show up as a brand. And by setting the company's standard in Grammarly Business and infusing that directly into employees' workflows, we're empowering all teams to embody the brand in everything that they do. Style guides help us easily implement messaging and claims changes. For example, we recently updated the number of teams using Grammarly Business to 50,000. And by making a simple edit in our style guide, we can ensure that every time someone uses that metric, they're using the latest one.
When you're communicating with a VP, you don't want to send a message with errors, especially here at Grammarly. The pressure is on to be as polished as possible. That's why it's so important for us to communicate quickly, but also accurately. Our team has over 120 snippets, and we use them to easily send details about pricing, case studies, proof points. Grammarly Business helps my team write faster while staying on brand and mistake-free, but we're still able to incorporate our own personality in each interaction. Our goal is to provide a smooth, cohesive experience for our customers by answering their questions in a timely and comprehensive way, while also guiding them to find the answers on their own. To do this, our team needs a deep understanding of our product and the ability to communicate clearly and concisely. That's where brand tones and sentence rewrites come in. Brand tones sent by the marketing team ensure that we're embodying the brand voice in every interaction, while rewrites help us be even more clear and concise in our communication. The confidence it gives me is invaluable.
As an engineer by trade, it's helpful for me to contextualize vague words so that leadership and other non-engineering teams understand what my team is working on. When I use words like significant or large, our style guides have a rule called weasel words. It flags these types of terms to suggest that in a business proposal, I need to quantify or be more specific to help my audience understand the impact of my proposal.
On finance teams, it's really important that we are very precise and clear in our communication. A lot of people use MM as an abbreviation when they're writing out numbers. Now, it's a little unclear whether that means millions or thousands, and in different countries, it's used in different ways. So we have a style guide suggestion to help us write it out as millions, which is good, because if we mean to spend $1 million, we don't want to accidentally spend 1,000 instead. I started using Grammarly at my last company I had these really important communications I wanted to send, emails to our board and to our investors. And Grammarly helped me do that more confidently and therefore more quickly. Other people in my company started hearing about it too, and they started to use it as well. And eventually we got to the point where we just had to have Grammarly Business because so many people in our company wanted to use it.
If you're interested in seeing how Grammarly Business can help your organization, you can start a free trial today.
There's one simple hearing hack anyone can use to improve their hearing almost overnight. Did you know that hearing impairments have nothing to do with your ears? The ears are nothing more than a microphone to the part of the brain responsible for your hearing. Here's the problem. No matter what type of hearing aid you use or what treatments you try, you're only treating the symptoms, not the real root cause. Listen, eventually it will get harder and harder to understand words during a conversation, leaving you feeling isolated and less social. This is when your family starts wondering if you're able to take care of yourself. And next thing you know, you're being sent off to the old folks' home. Luckily for you, there's now a solution. Top scientists from the University of Cambridge made a shocking discovery while researching a little-known area of the brain. These scientists were shocked to discover that all hearing impairments stem from one single root cause. Most importantly, they revealed a simple 10-second technique that you can start using tonight, which is now clinically proven to restore your hearing back to normal, regardless of your age or current condition. In fact, 70-year-old patients that were completely dependent on their hearing aids for over 7 years are now hearing better than ever. I urge you to stop what you're doing and tap the blue Watch Now button below right now to watch a free special video that will show you how to naturally restore your hearing. And remember, you won't need a doctor or have to spend hundreds of dollars, as this is something you can effortlessly do from home. More than 197,000 people of all ages are already doing this 10-second solution and can finally hear clearly, even in the noisiest places. Just imagine, no more buzzing, roaring, or humming noises, no more dealing with expensive hearing aids that never really work. And best of all, you'll finally be able to enjoy normal conversations with your loved ones again. However, the billion-dollar hearing aid industry has already removed this special presentation from the internet twice before, in a desperate attempt to protect their profits. So it's uncertain how long the information will remain available this time. Tap the blue Watch Now button below before it's too late.
The answer is simple. Part of my job requires me to give presentations, requires me to go to conferences and be social, even when it's sometimes painful. As an instructor, if I were to be shy and reserved and guarded, I will not connect with you. So if I'm trying to connect with you, I think it's important for me to engage you. And all of these years of teaching has helped me become a more engaging person. So I've shifted a little bit on one small aspect of personality. So some things can change based on experience. Many things stay the same and vice versa. So some things stay the same, some things change, and that's a combination of the two. Is development smooth and gradual, or is it burst-like? Well, by now, this is the third question I've asked you, so you know that it's a combination of the two. So when we talk about continuous processes, that is suggesting that we have a smooth, gradual process that is continuous, similar to a small tree. As it gets older, it becomes a bigger tree with a more massive arbor branches, but a tree is a tree is a tree, right? It's smooth and gradual, it just gets taller and bigger. whereas other things are discontinuous, stage-like. And when we talk about discontinuous development, it's important to understand stages. And in stages, there are bursts of development. It's no longer gradual. And another important part of these stages is that it's transformative. Your perspective on the world shifts as you move from one stage to the next. You're no longer seeing the world the same. And remember how when I talked about continuous development, I described a tree as a tree as a tree. Not everything in nature works that way. Because if you think of a caterpillar goes through many stages of its life. It starts as a caterpillar, it eats, it eats, it eats. Then it wraps itself up in a chrysalis, a cocoon. And then when it leaves the cocoon, it's no longer the same. It's transformed into a butterfly. So it started as a creepy crawler worm-like structure, and now it's a flying entity, transformative. So when we talk about stages of development, it's important to understand that. So what's the point? I want you to know these because these are going to resurface these debates, nature versus nurture, stability versus change, continuity versus discontinuity. I'm going to remind you of what we said today. But I wanted to have the building blocks here in our first lesson. The other lesson is don't take extremes, because most things are a combination of factors that come together, and most developmentalists acknowledge that development is not all or nothing. It's not one or the other, it's usually a combination. All right, so now let's talk about theories. Theories are frameworks of understanding the world around you. Developmental theories or lifespan developmental theories are trying to understand development. And there are different theories, and I'm going to go through each of these theories. Now, it's important to understand that not everything that is said in these theories are actually true. And you might ask yourself, well, why do we teach these theories if some of the pieces of information in these theories have been disproven by science? The answer is that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Each of these theories has something to offer. They're not perfect. They add some value, they give you some perspective on development, but not the full picture. So I'm going to cover some of them.
Good nights give unbeatable protection against bedwetting. Awesome days start with good nights.
Let's start with psychoanalytic theories. So when we talk about psychoanalytic theories, you probably have heard the major player in this domain, Sigmund Freud. You don't need my class to hear about Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud focused on the unconscious. In fact, Sigmund Freud believed that the unconscious is the most influential aspect of personality. And he talks about the mind as being the iceberg, and most of the mind is hidden. So he went on different paths to try and understand what is in the unconscious. And he tried different things like hypnosis to tap into the unconscious, dream analysis to tap into the unconscious, and psychotherapy to tap into the unconscious. And he looked for your experience, and sometimes there are taboos that we push beneath the surface, and they manifest in symbolic ways. So your true understanding of a person requires you to understand the symbols or symbolic meanings of their behavior. That's one thing that was important from psychoanalytic lens. In addition, Freud believed that early childhood plays a role in later development. So Freud puts a strong emphasis on the parent-child relationship, and if there is a problem in development, it's likely due to some parenting factor. that caused a fixation, which we will talk about as we go forward. Now, Freud's theory, or stage theory of development, is the psychosexual stage theory of development. And he says you go through 5 stages: oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital. These 5 stages, you have unique challenges. So the oral stage, pleasure surrounds the mouth. And when we think of the oral stage, this is in infancy, birth to about 18 months. What is the biggest thing that we know that kids are trying to master at that point? Feeding. So whether you're bottle feeding or breastfeeding doesn't matter. There is the feeding is the greatest source of pleasure in infancy. And you have a dilemma. When do you take the child off the nipple, whether it be physical or metaphorical? And if you take the child off the nipple too early, or you allow the child to nurse too long, the child could develop an oral fixation. Remember what I said, early child development affects you later at a point. So fixation is when you get stuck and you have an unresolved issue from a stage of development, and that affects your later point. And Freud said there were oral fixations like biting your nails, that was an oral fixation. Chewing on straws and pens is an oral fixation. Being overly sarcastic is an oral fixation because it's related to the mouth. Eating disorders is an oral fixation. Substance use disorders are an oral fixation. So you might say, well, why substance use disorders? Well, the answer is that we've gotten creative on how to get high in the last 200-300 years. But for many people have eaten leaves or ingested things. So substance use disorders are linked to oral stage of development. But at about 18 months, something else starts to emerge, the anal stage. And then pleasure surrounds the anus, and you have a major goal between 18 months and 3 years. And anyone who has kids in this class knows that that issue is potty training. You have a decision when to start potty training. If you start potty training too early, or you delay potty training, you can develop an anal fixation. You could be anal retentive or anal expulsive. Anal retentive is a person whose characteristics are very rigid, or a psychological condition might be OCD, needing things to be a certain way. That comes from the child, according to Freud, not wanting to potty train, holding their bowels in, versus anal expulsive is letting it all hang out. So this could be anyone who's exceedingly messy. So at the age of 3, something interesting happens. We recognize our gender expression.
And since NJM operates as a mutual, they don't have to answer to shareholders, which means they put policyholders over profits, so their customers can live happily ever after.
One more time, please.
And according to Freud, and forgive the binary nature of this, this is a theory that is not culturally sensitive, but I'm teaching it nonetheless. Males recognize they're males, females recognize that they're females. And according to Freud, males and females have different reactions to this. Males are happy to be male because it comes with power and privilege. And females develop penis envy. They have a sense of inferiority because they don't have a penis, according to Freud. Right? So there is a sense of jealousy of men, according to Freud. There is a sense of wishing you were a man, which isn't really true. But nevertheless, he said this. And for males, you recognize the power of the genitalia, and then you develop a sense of castration anxiety and anxiety around losing the organ. And that occurs particularly because of something called the Oedipus complex, where you're lusting after your mother, afraid of your father, and you're afraid that your father is stronger than you, and if you act on these Oedipal impulses, you're gonna be castrated, right? So these are all parts of his theory, and we're gonna unpack it in greater detail in a later lesson, but I'm just giving you a flavor. Latency is about 5 to 6. At 5 to 6, you go into school and then all of your sexual urges are dormant, they're latent. And this is the calm between the storms, a play on words, right? So the storm of the phallic stage versus the genital stage. But when you hit puberty, you start to go back to these urges, and then you are capable, according to Freud, in the genital stage of mature sexual relationships. That's at puberty. And he didn't encourage 12 and 13-year-olds to be engaging in sex. All he suggested with the word mature is that the parts work, and if you interact, you have the capability of reproducing. Now, Freud put a lot of emphasis in his psychosexual states theory on sex. He devalued culture to a great degree, which is a shame. Even his dream analysis, Freud was overly sexual. So many people who came after him tried to desexualize the stages, right? And they put more of an emphasis on culture over sexual instinct. So we should talk about Erik Erikson. Erik Erikson is known as an ego psychologist. He comes out of the psychoanalytic or psychodynamic tree, but he focused more on psychosocial development versus psychosexual development. He focused more on the ego versus Freud focusing on the id. So he focuses on what you're supposed to master at a given age and how it's resolved. So there are a list of 8 stages from infancy to late adulthood. And we're going to go through these in great detail, so I'm not going to spend much time in this lecture on it because we do a deep dive on all of these theories. But this is a list starting